Good evening all, and welcome. Have you ever felt like someone's watching you? A cold chill travel up your spine when you think someone's staring at you? It's even more creepy if you're home alone while this happens. I'm sure that there's no one behind you right now, no one looking in your window, no one staring at you through the attic hatch, right? It's time to get uncomfortable and let the darkness take control. This is a story from my childhood, one of the ones that haunts me to this day. Have you ever seen those memes where it says people react like a criminal when an unexpected visitor arrives at their doorstep? They freeze and drop everything they're doing and throw themselves to the floor to avoid being seen in the window. This is my story of how I became one of those people. At the time, I must have been around 7.5. I was visiting the Midwest, Kansas to be exact, from South Korea, where I was born and raised, and was just visiting family. Nothing major. On that particular night, the adults, our auntie, uncle, and parents, were going to have a date night, so our parents ordered us a pizza before they left and waited for it to arrive, so that we wouldn't have to open the door for anyone. My aunt and uncle had 2 kids, 2 boys, 15 and 8. I was about 7.5 at the time. My older sister was 11 and our baby brother was the young, tender age of 3. So all in all, we're ready to just have a fun night of games. After all, it wasn't often the cousins got together like this. They lived in the States and we lived in Korea, but we all loved each other dearly. We saw our parents out at the garage entryway. They made sure we knew the rules and we could recite them back to them. They also made sure we knew where the telephones were and the emergency numbers to accompany them. It's just going to be a typical night of no parents. Or so we thought. It had been maybe an hour after our parents had departed. We were downstairs in the basement in the playroom and were just watching a movie, playing air hockey, and being kids in general. We weren't being loud or anything, and even if we were, it wasn't much of a big deal, because the way houses were in Kansas, the basement are built in the ground in case of a tornado. I'd gone upstairs with my oldest cousin because I wanted to drink some chocolate milk and couldn't reach the cups alone, so we wandered upstairs into the kitchen, which was on the far end of the house. The others stayed downstairs continuing their games. We had maybe been upstairs for 15 to 20 minutes before, while I was drinking my milk, my older cousin was making snacks since we were planning to watch a movie. Then all of a sudden we hear the doorbell ring. I remember my cousin looked at me and told me to stay here because it was odd that the doorbell was ringing and it wasn't too late, but it certainly wasn't early. And I say this because it was summer. It was around 8 o'clock. My cousin started to creep towards the door quietly. It was unnerving for someone to be ringing the doorbell. We weren't expecting any guests. The pizza had been delivered before our parents had even left. And before he's even halfway to the door, whoever is on the other side starts rapidly ringing the doorbell over and over. The consistent ring echoed through the house, and by this point I had looked over towards the staircase and saw our other siblings starting to creep up the stairs, with the exclusion of the baby, who was still asleep in the crib in the guest room. The oldest of the kids, James, put his finger to his lips and told us to be quiet, to make it seem like no one was home, despite there being lights on. He crept closer to the door as the banging and ringing on the doorbell continued as he peeked through the peephole. I had never seen my cousin look so freaked out. His face drained of color as he backed away from the door rapidly, and he told us to go downstairs, but of course we didn't listen. Honestly, we thought he was playing a joke. Maybe it was some of his friends wanting to scare us, since he did cancel his plans that night to stay home and watch all of us kids. My older sister shoved past him and looked through the peephole herself, and for whatever reason, whatever was on the other side of the door made her have the exact same reaction and she stumbled back from the door, pale. At the time, I didn't really understand what was going on. I don't think any of us younger kids really did, but something wasn't right. After 20 minutes, whoever was at the door stopped ringing the doorbell and all was quiet again. It seemed like they gave up. Maybe they thought no one was home. If only we knew how wrong we really were. We all sat in silence for a while after this initially occurred. My other cousin, Kyle, mustered up the courage to ask his brother James who was at the door and why James and my sister were acting so skittish. James told us there was a man wearing dark clothes and seemed to be carrying some type of package or large box, but he couldn't see his face. Of course, Kyle, being the little smarty pants he was, started to mock James, saying he was just being a scaredy cat and didn't recognize their neighbors. Kyle was convinced it was a neighbor dropping off a package that may have gotten mixed up in the mail, seeing as it happened all the time. So we agreed that this was probably the cause, until we realized whoever was ringing the doorbell didn't just leave the package on the porch. Which, isn't that what most neighbors do? In the case of no one answers, they'll just leave it. And why would they try to bring it over in the house at night instead of just waiting until the next day? But we thought it was over and done with, so we pushed it to the back of our minds. We didn't think it was important to call our parents and let them know what happened. It was over after all. We went back to the kitchen, grabbed the snacks, and started to head back downstairs until we heard banging again. It wasn't from the front porch this time, though. We were in shock. We froze in fear. It was coming from right behind us. We slowly turned and looked back in the direction from which we came from. We were currently standing in the dining room. We had already passed through the kitchen. It was like someone was banging on the kitchen window. You know, the ones that are typically above the sink, so your mother or father can watch the kids while they play in the backyard as they do the dishes. So James and my older sister Nicole got down on their hands and knees and they crawled back into the kitchen, much against our charging. Just as quickly as they crawled into the kitchen to take a peek, they crawled back out in almost hyperspeed and told us to get low and stay low as we crawled into the den further down the hallway. James had us huddled close to the fireplace, out of sight from the windows, and he told us to stay there. He was taking charge. He was protecting his home and family the best way he knew how. James quickly crawled away. I don't know where he was going, but I was scared. The banging was getting louder, and it was getting closer and closer. At some point I started to cry and remember Kyle put his hand over my mouth and my sister was hugging us tight. And around that time we saw James starting to appear back around the corner, baseball bat in hand. He crawled up another staircase to get to his room. He crawled past us and put a finger on his lips, and that's when we realized he was crawling towards the doggy door. He was attempting to close off one entrance to the house that wasn't locked. Thankfully, he managed to get it latched in time because we don't think the man outside had realized that the house had a doggy door. But when we heard the lock click into place, the banging became more erratic and more violent. Then all of a sudden, much like before, the banging stopped, but we heard pacing. Someone was walking back and forth across the porch, slowly, deliberately. Thump, thump, thump. His heavy boots thundered across the red oak porch, and then without warning the pacing stopped, and it became quiet, eerily quiet. Then the man called out, "Won't you open the door? I have a package for you." We didn't respond. We stayed quiet, all as quiet as we could be, with the way our hearts were pounding and how ragged our breath was. The stranger called out again, "Open the door," and again. We didn't answer. The man called out angrily, "I said open the door, I have a package." Like before, we didn't answer, nor did we make any sudden movements. The man banged again, this time directly on the panel window of the room we were sitting in. "I know you're there. I know you can hear me. Open the door or I'll open it for you." He continued banging. The window rattled and shook violently with each impact from the strange man. Thankfully, our cousin's house had reinforced windows, so they weren't easy to break. But unluckily, we didn't have any nearby neighbors, so we didn't think anyone could hear the commotion. But while he was making the noise, we took the opportunity to book it into another room to get a phone. At one point, while we were on the phone with the police officers, they asked us if we could describe the man. Then all we knew was that he was tall and wearing black. So Kyle and I decided to be brave. So if something did happen to us that night, they would at least have a better description of who did it. We crawled back into the den and dared to look out of a small corner of the window. We gently moved the curtains out the way, and Lord behold, the man was still banging. He had moved the shutters off outside of the window, and they were basically hanging off their hinges at this point, rattling with the wind. We made direct eye contact with that deranged man. Direct, soul-searching eye contact. I don't think before this night I had ever believed, but there is pure evil in this world. But when I looked into that man's eyes, I didn't see a soul. I know that sounds crazy, but those were not the eyes of a human. He was something unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Animalistic might be the word of choice, besides demonic. It was evil, unnatural, and something I never want to see again. When he saw us, he smiled, a twisted grin that I'm sure he thought was reassuring when he crouched down, so that he could get a better look at us. He then said, "Don't you want your mail? I can give it to you, if you only open the door." I remember grabbing onto Kyle's hand for dear life, and Kyle shook his head, and he threw the curtain back, and before we even had a chance to move any further, the man started violently banging on the window again. At this point, James had enough. He passed the phone to my sister and he yelled, "Leave us alone! The police are on their way and you're not getting in." After that, it seemed like the man panicked and the banging abruptly stopped. And when we heard rapid footsteps on the porch and Kyle and I peeked out the window again, the man was running through the yard past all the trees and jumped the fence. The wooden 22-foot fence at the end of the yard into the alley that separated the neighborhood from the old cemetery. We stayed on the phone with the police until they arrived, and our parents got there not long after. But the man was never caught, and we don't know what happened after that night. He just vanished into thin air. To this day, I'm 21 now. Whenever the doorbell rings when I'm not expecting a visitor, my heart drops. I break out into a cold sweat, and that's all thanks to the mystery package man. I'm a 31-year-old male, Dutch but now residing in Uganda. This story happened when I was 13 years old. Before I start, there's important information that is crucial to understand what happened. I am Dutch, and I grew up in a town of about 60,000 people. I come from an upper-middle-class family and lived in a neighborhood that was built in the forest. The entire town is known to have a lot of nature. We lived in a big one-story house with 2 lavatories, 2 bathrooms, a garage, a big living room, 6 bedrooms, and a nice garden all around the house. My parents were never people that thought a lot about safety. We had a huge sliding glass door connecting our garden, and our garden was easily accessible from all directions. Also, I can't remember, but I think the garage door would lead to either my brother's bedroom on the right side of the house or to the corridor that would lead to my sister's parents and my bedroom. This could be locked. My father's solution was to park his car in front of the garage door so that no one could get in. This house gave me the creeps ever since I can remember. My parents got a divorce when I was 8, and I lived with my mother, and I was finally able to leave my dad's house. The story I want to tell you happened when I was 14. I was playing soccer and actually got recruited for the youth academy of a team that played in the highest tier of Dutch soccer. This info is relevant later. We had a vacation impending at the time. Me and my best friend wanted to have a sleepover, and my dad had gone on vacation and his house was empty. So, as normal hormonal teenagers, we decided we wanted to spend a few nights in his house, watch movies, stay up late, play games on the PlayStation, typical things that 14-year-olds want to do. The day was perfectly normal, and as it became night, around 10 p.m., we start to hear upbeat music coming far from the distance. We decide to check it out. We leave my father's house and we follow the direction where the music is coming from, and it leads us out of the neighborhood onto a cycling lane with lots of bends that go through the forest. I used to take this way all the time to reach the soccer club, so I knew it by heart, as I did know the forest quite well. I told my friend that the music is most likely coming from the horse stables and that they probably have something like a teen disco, and that it might be fun to see if we can sneak into the party and have some fun. We continue on our way following the music, and Lord behold, the music did come from the horse stables. Now the only way I know to reach the horse stable was to go on the paved cycle lane and walk a kilometer on an unlit dirt path. The path was on both sides and covered by the forest, with the stables straight ahead of us. While we were making our way on the path and getting all psyched up by the idea of crashing a party, as we were a bit loud, on 2/3 of the way we hear a loud rustling coming from the left side of the forest. We are right on the side of the path, and this person emerges from it, completely dressed in black, with a long Matrix-style jacket and a black hat to go. We both brush it off as a man who was looking for his dog or something, but I'm a bit freaked out, and softly elbow my buddy and say, "Man, what the hell would he come out into a forest like this for at this time of night? Wonder what he's doing." He responds with, "It's probably nothing. Don't be so scared. We live in a town where nothing happens." His answer convinced me to continue. As we walked towards the stables, we walked towards the person, and he walks in our direction but stays on the other side of the path. The closer we got, the more my gut is telling me to get the hell out of here. I poke my buddy again. "Dude, I really don't like this. Call me a coward, but I'm getting really uncomfortable. Don't want to go to the stables anymore." I'm freaking out. And before he has time to respond, the guy is inches from us and yells, "Come back here." And he starts running after us. Oh crap. I see that my friend is slowing down to catch his breath, and I run to him and tell him to dive into the bushes and hide. While I run, hopefully he'll follow me. He hides in the bushes while I scream loudly and run for all I'm worth, looking behind me to see where the guy is, and he's still chasing me. I have no idea where I can hide from him. The bicycle lane is just straight for the next 500 meters or so, and I keep running. I finally reach the part of the lane where there are several short bends, and after I run the third, I see a small patch where I jump in and dive behind some bushes. I hear the guy running, and he passes me, with him shouting, "Wait, come here, you little brats." I remain silent and in my hiding spot. I hear the footsteps going further away. I make my way back to where my friend hid from him, but without using the cycle lane. I reach the place and call his name, and he emerges from the bushes, and we decide to go back to my father's house, but take a big detour in a different direction to where the guy ran. Nothing happens while we're heading back. We reach the house safe and sound, quickly go inside and lock every door and window. We go into my dad's room, which is all the way at the back of the house, and turn on the TV, still freaked out and super scared of what had just occurred. I still feel unsafe and uneasy. I close the curtains and slowly start to calm down. My friend stays quiet for a second, and we try to keep our minds busy with a movie. I wish the story just ended there. Until today, I'm not sure what happened next. Was it the same person or just a coincidence? But halfway through the movie, we both hear footsteps coming from the garage door, in the corridor heading into the living room. I quickly lock my father's bedroom door. I secure another window that leads to the bathroom straight into his room and lock the bathroom door also. I look at the last door. He has 3 doors that leads into his bedroom that lead into the back garden. I open the door and quickly slip out behind his room, grabbing 2 spades and slip into my father's room, brandishing my 2 new weapons. For 30 minutes we heard footsteps in his house. I see a shadow in the living room from the gap in the curtains, but not well enough to make out who it was. And just like that, it was gone. We didn't sleep that night. We were on high alert. As soon as daylight arrived, we left the house and headed to my mum's place and tell her the story. My dad calls me 2 weeks later. He returned from his vacation and he knows that I stayed a night with my friend. My mum told him the story, and he asks if I trust my friend, which I confirm. He proceeds to tell me his hard drive from his computer was stolen while he was on vacation. Not his brand new TV, not my brother's TV or PlayStation, and not a whole computer. Nothing looked like anything was wrong until we tried turning on the computer and nothing was there. Someone broke into his house specifically to steal his hard drive. I don't know if it was the man chasing us in the forest. The more I think about it, the more it would not make sense. He came from the forest in the opposite direction where we were coming from, so he didn't follow us, I think? Why chase us so obviously if you wanted to steal something so specific? But the chances of those 2 things happening in the same night is also highly unlikely. My name is Gigi, and I was 14 at the time. This happened about 4 years ago. That day, my little brother Noah was sick and had already spent 3 days in bed. He had a high fever, no big deal. The only real trouble was that he was 6 and obviously got our entire attention for that week. So yeah, that day my parents went out to buy his medicine and left me alone to take care of him. They also asked me to bring all of my brother's toys inside so they wouldn't get wet from the rain that was coming later that day. So I did as I was asked. I took care of Noah and I brought some of the toys that were laying outside. I was pretty tired that day, and I thought that I could do the rest later. So I went inside and sat down on the couch to watch TV before I had to prepare for my brother's lunch. I was zapping through the channels and wasn't really aware of what was going on around me. About 10 minutes later, I heard 3 honking noises coming from the street and didn't really pay any attention to it. It could have been the neighbors or a car passing by. Then I realized how late it was and that I had to go to the kitchen and start making my brother's lunch. Noah was resting upstairs, so I was in the kitchen cooking his meal. The thing is, my kitchen has a large window offering a view on the street, and I saw my neighbor a bit worried out of his car looking around. Once again, I didn't pay any attention to it and was focused on the food. At a moment, I opened the fridge and had a weird feeling like someone was there staring at me. I closed the fridge door and looked at the window, and there was a person standing outside close to the window looking in. Now I don't know why, but I can't for the life of me remember what that guy looked like. There's a stranger standing outside staring at me and I wanted to scream for help, but I just couldn't. I felt like the only thing that I was going to do was take my brother and leave the house via the back door. I know it's a bit excessive, but I was 14 and imagined the guy would break the window in any moment to come in. So on my way to Noah's room, I noticed the guy following me very calmly through the window. Imagine my surprise when I found the front door a little open. I'm certain I didn't close it correctly when I brought his toys back in, and because of that, I now have the habit to check at least 3 times if I lock the door for sure. When I saw the door, I understood, and eventually got a few seconds to go upstairs instead of closing it because he was close enough to get in before I reached it. So instead I ran upstairs, rushed into my brother's room and closed his bedroom door. Noah was very weak and kind of upset because of the noise I made downstairs. It could seem unimportant, but hearing him complain made me realize we couldn't leave anymore, and while I was thinking I heard someone coming up the stairs and literally crapped myself. In a desperate move I opened the window, and fortunately underneath it stood Noah's big-ass trampoline, the one with a net around it. The only thing reasonable for me was to throw my brother onto it and jump, hoping we wouldn't break our bones. Luckily, the first floor was only 4 meters high. When we landed on the trampoline, I could hear the bedroom door open. Now, Noah says while getting off he saw a face, apparently of someone with a beard, white eyebrows and a hoodie, and a great psycho smile. I didn't, but I believe him. We got off and started running the streets. While I was running, I heard a voice behind us screaming, "Gigi?" I turned around and was relieved to see it was one of our neighbors, the one observing the street prior, that was waving at us to come inside their house. I was very happy to go into their house, as we used to go over and play with their kids all the time. He closed the door and we waited in there for our parents to return. We were there with his wife and kids while he was waiting out there. Funny thing he explained later is that he saw everything. He honked at the stalker because he was standing in the middle of the street looking at the house, and he also saw the guy walk into the house and a girl throwing her brother through the window. It was very funny when he told it back to us. So my parents came back and were ironically planning a good little evening, and they brought pizzas and a movie along with the medicine. So imagine how stupid they looked when they saw police cars and us waiting with them. We explained everything and later moved elsewhere. We were already looking for a new place anyway, but that really gave us the motivation to search really hard. We don't know what happened, but when the cops came in, the back door was open and there was no one inside, so obviously he bolted. As I said, I still think about it sometimes, and there's no way I will ever know who that guy was. I also realized if I had done what I was asked and brought the trampoline back in the garage as I was supposed to, well, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. The only thing I regret is that now Noah is 10, we got rid of his old toys, as well as the trampoline, which means we can't make that jump thing if it happens again. So to the creepy stalker, let's not meet. This happened when I was around 12 years old. It was in the middle of the night at my house. My dad would work the graveyard shift. Since it was the weekend, I had stayed up most of the night. It was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and my dad had told me to lock the door and go to sleep, which I did. I went to my room and finally passed out, but only for about an hour. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking on my back door. It scared me awake. After taking a few moments to process what I heard, I decided it was probably just my dad knocking on the door. Maybe he just forgot something, maybe being really exhausted. I knew he had a house key, so I just told myself he was more than capable to unlock the door. But the knocking persisted. It was pretty creepy. Then the next thing I knew, the knocking stopped, and then it started again, but at a different location. Someone was knocking on the window in my kitchen. I continued to assure myself it was my dad. I didn't understand why he couldn't just unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him and I felt pretty freaked out, so I wasn't answering the door. If anything, my dad would call me to open the door on my phone, which was right next to me. The knocking started again at another window. I was terrified now, too scared to get up and check who was out there. But the knocking wasn't stopping. And the next thing I know, the knocking moved to my front door at a harsher level too. That's when it hit me that I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't scream or talk or move a muscle. My heart was dropping at the knocking, and it moved to another window closer and closer to my bedroom, to the point where my curtains could see through. I still couldn't move. I didn't know what to do or say. I could only stay out as my fear consumed me. I moved my eyes over to the window and my heart stopped when I saw a man peering through. A tall man with a dark ski mask. I could hardly make out the details because it was so dark, but I think his mask had some sort of skeleton design on it. He tilted his head slightly. I tried to scream, but nothing came out of me. I closed my eyes hard and started yelling, telling myself it isn't real, over and over. I opened my eyes and there was no one there. I sighed in relief until I heard a loud whisper tell me, "I'll cut you." Everything suddenly stopped. I couldn't move again. I really couldn't sleep anymore that night either. It didn't feel like a dream. I've never experienced sleep paralysis before and everything was so real. I don't know what happened, but I pray that I'll never have to experience it again. It was one of the most frightening moments of my life that I've ever dealt with. I was home alone that day, so no one could back me up. But the following morning, I asked my dad when he came back from work if he came back earlier that day and knocked on my doors and windows. He confirmed that he did not. Let me give you some context. This story happened about 10 years ago. In England, if you want to go to university, you have to apply through an agency called UCAS to get accepted or not. I didn't get the grades I wanted and was not accepted to any of the universities I had applied to, which was a big kick in the ovaries for me. However, there is this other process called clearing, which for those of us who tried really hard but didn't excel at the exams gives us a shot to get into a handful of schools. I was fortunate enough that I managed to secure a place via clearing and attend a local university. It was only an hour's drive away, but I was 18 and wanted freedom. My 3 sisters and my parents were a handful to deal with, especially as 2 of them were quite young, and my parents can be overprotective and overbearing at the least of times. So I elected to move out and rent a place up at university. Now, of course, most people who got their applications through earlier already had their spots reserved, which meant I was in a precarious position, as when I inquired into the local dorms and such, I found that there was no room for little old me. There was nowhere I could stay, which is how this story begins. I was looking on the internet to try and find a place to live, somewhere that had my budget in mind, but that wasn't far from the university. Otherwise, I could hardly justify the expense that it was going to cost to my parents, as I couldn't afford to pay rent without getting a loan in the first place, which is quite normal for people here in the UK. After about 3 days of searching, and growing less and less optimistic with the prospect of moving out, did I finally find on one of the last pages of the search page a decent property. The price was incredibly reasonable, and it was completely private too. It was a very small apartment as part of a house. It was on the upper part, but the house had been changed into 2 or 3 apartments. I had the top one, and it was, funnily enough, the largest. It also housed the attic, and the only condition was that I had to relinquish control of the apartment during the hours that someone needed to get access from the attic. But this was very unlikely. But it was important to the owners that they had access to it, and that I would be willing to work with them if they ever needed it, which I was totally cool with. 18-year-old me was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to get to my new place. Then September rolls around. I'm there early, at least 2 weeks before school starts, and I'm so excited to be dwelling in my new place. I can't wait to make friends, invite people over, and was absolutely delighted with how much bigger it was in person than I thought. It was bigger than all our upstairs in our old house. I had a living room, somewhere to put my modest TV, my gaming console, my laptop, my stereo. I had a kitchen, all of these cool things to myself, and I felt so happy. But there was something I need to let you know. The apartment had a weird, heavy feeling to it, a dark vibe. I don't really know how to describe it, but I never really felt super comfortable there. At the start, I just assumed that it was because I was moving out for the first time and was missing home. But despite the fact that I kept putting excuses up, as the days went by and I made it more personal, I still never felt any better about it. The day comes where uni starts. I'm having a blast. I've made a bunch of friends, and within the first few weeks I invite people over to a house party at mine. It was great fun, but one of my friends, called Trisha, told me she felt really weird in my bedroom. I asked her why. You see, Trisha had drank way too much, So we dragged her to my bed so that she could sleep it off while the rest of us continued drinking and chatting and listening to music. She said that while she was in bed, she heard the cupboard creak. That's where I kept my shoes. She said she saw someone peep out, and then it was gone. She was drunk, remember, so I don't know how credible this statement was, and honestly, none of us took notice about it. But a few weeks later, I was going to bed, and just as I was falling asleep, did I hear something, almost like a footstep. I look around my room, tell myself it's just house noises, and try to go back to sleep. About 15 minutes in, I'm tossing and turning and still uncomfortable. Something's annoying me. I feel like someone's watching me. I resort to putting on some YouTube to try and get myself to sleep. Maybe listen to some funny videos, just some background noise to help me lull. About 15 minutes into the video, I'm just silent, with the light shining on my table. And I hear it again. A little squeak. I start to get uncomfortable. It's behind me, so I slowly turn my body to look, and I see that my cupboard door is ever so slightly ajar. You need to understand something about me. I'm very anal when it comes to organization. I know I closed that cupboard because I had organized my shoes within it earlier that day, and I liked it the way I liked it. There's no way I could have left it open. This was bothering me. I wondered if perhaps it had broken at some point. So I got up, opened both doors wide, and there I see a face. I just about crapped myself. The face withdraws into the darkness, and as I flick my light on, I look, and there's nothing there. There's just a panel. Several wooden panels that make up the back of the wardrobe. I never even bothered to touch them before. I start to feel freaked out. So I start from the right and start banging on each individual panel. All three of them sound the same. I try to give them a shove, and they all feel solid enough. I put my ear up against the wardrobe, navigating past my shoes and hanging dresses and stuff, to get my ear right up against it. I can't hear anything. I wait a moment, and that's when I hear what sounds like someone pattering down some small stairs. What the hell is this, I thought. I didn't know what to do. I called my dad and told him I didn't feel comfortable and explained the situation. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and he really didn't want to take the hour drive to come up to see me and check out my room, as he had to be at work early in the morning. So he agreed reluctantly after a little bit of convincing that he'd come down. He arrived, opened up my room and my closet, and had a poke around. He asked me how much my house deposit was, and after telling him he had an idea, he told me that he could break it to check. If there's nothing there, he'd fix it, paint it, and no one would be none the wiser. But that if there is, he knows there's something shady going on. He pushed with his hands, but it wouldn't budge, and that's when he got a hammer from his car and bashed it. With a few hits, the wooden panel splintered, and as he pushed it back, did we notice a light coming from behind it. It was only faint, and when we looked through, there was a tiny passage, almost like a crawl space, that led to some stairs. At this point, my father gulped. He was now very annoyed. We managed to go through, and he looked behind it. It was like a few latches. The panel could be easily removed, and by putting the latches back, no one would know that you could access it via this way. He was furious. We never found out for sure, but he was quite confident that the person who rented the apartment was the family member of a person who lived downstairs. It was a dude, early 40s, and I'd only seen him once in passing. He slept there that night, called in sick at work, and I called in sick at uni. We banged on the door downstairs to meet a very unpleasant and unkempt-looking guy. He asked us what we wanted, and he asked if he had anything to do with the guy who rented us the apartment. He said that they were family and that he could answer any questions we had. We were trying to play the idiot, pretend like we were completely oblivious to what we knew he was doing. And my dad told him to come upstairs and check something with him, that there was something funny under the bed. The guy was clueless. He came upstairs anyway, and when he got to the top, my dad showed him the hole and how they'd removed the panel. You could see the guilt etched on his face, and he claimed he had absolutely no idea of what we were talking about. But that's when my dad went into protective dad mode and started yelling at him, and told him that if they didn't give us our deposit back, the money we paid for rent, and a little bit more, that he would be calling the police for an invasion of privacy and who knows what else. The man quickly went downstairs, withdrew a whole load of money in cash, even more than what we'd asked for, gave it to us, and asked us please not to tell the police. But at that point my dad had had a change of heart. He told him to take his money and that he didn't care and that he was calling the police. They arrived, and it was a bit of a scene. Then the man actually got arrested. He got off though on some bullshit excuse, because it wasn't technically his house and la, which really annoyed me. Makes me think we should have taken the money, but ethically we simply couldn't do it. In any case, we moved out. We did get some money back, but it wasn't enough, and I ended up moving back home because I didn't have enough to find a new place, as they were all incredibly expensive. But I learnt my lesson, and it was a creepy experience while being home alone, something I am now quite afraid to do. I live in a flat that only has 3 floors and doesn't have a lift. So if you live in the 3rd floor, you have to walk all the way up the stairs. This situation happened at midday while I was chilling at home and my mum was picking up my sister from school. So that meant that I had to let in the man who stops by every Thursday selling water containers. The thing is, he's supposed to deliver the water containers by 2 p.m. This time was the one that my mother told me specifically he should be there, otherwise no one's home. But on this day he arrived at midday. He rings the doorbell and I tell him on the intercom we need 2 containers and go downstairs. Once you go downstairs, there's a really long hallway until you get to the front door of a building. I greet him. "Well, hello there," he says, kind of amused. I make some small talk, give him the money, to which he tells me not to worry, because he'll take the containers upstairs. I tell him I can handle it, but he keeps insisting. While we're going upstairs, he starts asking me questions like how old I am, why I wasn't at school, and the like. Red flags immediately go off. I answered that I was about to go to work, and I definitely don't go to school. I felt so uncomfortable and vulnerable, it was horrible. He placed the containers at the front of my door, and I told him, "Well, let me walk you back down the stairs." And his answer still annoyed me. "Oh, I wouldn't mind being stuck here with you." Are you kidding me? As if that wasn't creepy enough, he then asked me where my mum was. "She's inside helping my dad," I lied. This man could be my dad, and he was hitting on a woman he thought was a schoolgirl. It really couldn't get more disgusting. That walk on the long hallway was the slowest I've ever had. I couldn't wait for him to leave the building. I was shocked, mad, and felt dirty. I don't know why. I said bye, and he had the nerve to kind of hug me, and I shut the door on his face and ran up to my flat to try and feel safe, but I didn't. I was turning on the shower tap when my doorbell rang not once but 5 times. And not the one downstairs, the one upstairs. So to sum up, I locked myself in the bathroom until my mum came home and I blurted out what happened. You know what the worst thing is? Besides the way the creepy man behaved, it's that my mum told me I was overreacting. I was so angry and disappointed that I didn't talk to her until I came home late that night. I told her to be extra careful if my 12-year-old sister finds herself in this situation, to not open the door to this man under any circumstances, and after that, she told me I was right. A middle-aged man with good intentions wouldn't assume you go to school, ask you where your parents are, and tell you that he would like to be stuck in the building with you. He still comes every Thursday at midday, despite my mum telling him there's no one at home. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you did enjoy tonight's Home Alone stories. They certainly are quite creepy. Speaking of Home Alone, my wife's friend is an actress in this film called Host. It's on various streaming platforms. It's received a whole load of reviews, and it's the first ever film done entirely over Zoom. Now, me and my wife watched this a few nights ago, and I'm not gonna lie, I was captivated the entire time. And I'm not just saying this because my wife's friend's in it. This isn't your average horror movie where, you know, there's like a build up and then something happens. This is like horror from the get-go, and it's really, really good. I really liked it. Celebrities have been tweeting about it. It's a really good film. And I'm not gaining anything from telling you this, except the love of one horror fan to another. It really is worth watching, and if it's on any streaming platforms that you are subscribed to, look for it and check it out. I think it's only an hour long, but it's really, 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 really good. I really enjoyed it. If you've seen it, or if you're thinking of watching it, you know, leave some feedback down below. I mean, I think you'll really like it. And if you're curious who the friend is, in the film it's M, but they all have their real names, so it's Emma. Emma is my wife's friend. So yeah, please watch it. Let me know what you think. It's really good. It's a really good film. Like, I really, really recommend it. So yeah, thanks as always to my wonderful patrons who really help support the channel. And if you'd like to be a patron, I mean, I'd really appreciate that. Also, to all my current patrons who are actually listening right now, do you guys listen to the exclusive content I post on there? Because I don't really get many comments or likes on anything I post on there. So I'm just wondering, out of all the patrons I've got, do you guys even look? Because there is exclusive stuff on there. So, you know, consume the exclusive content and let me know what you think of it. Alright then guys, I think I'm going to leave it there. So stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.